Hello everyone and welcome to The Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris. Here's the headline. As much as half of priests and bishops in the U.S. may be homosexual. Now the details. Back in 2000, just as news of the homosexual priest sex abuse crisis was beginning to break, the Kansas City Star did an in-depth expose on a horrible topic, the large number of homosexual priests dying of AIDS. The newspaper's reporting brought to public light for the first time on this kind of scale the issue of homosexuality in the priesthood, albeit through the tragic lens of AIDS. The newspaper conducted extensive research into the related issues of AIDS and homosexuality within clerical ranks and religious communities. Far from denying the paper's stories, the Bishop of Kansas City at the time, Raymond Boland, admitted the findings were true and said, quote, "Much as we would regret it, it shows that human nature is human nature." The issue of the AIDS deaths aside, God rest their souls, it reveals the reality of homosexuality in the ranks of the ordained, and not just its presence, but its overwhelming presence. The same time the KC Star was publishing its series of reports, another report, much less known, was also being circulated, this time in private meetings in the church. It was prepared by the National Federation of Priests' Councils, a group born from the liberal days of the sexual revolution in the wake of Vatican II. In its 34 pages is a very vivid discussion of the AIDS crisis at the time among priests owing to the large number of homosexual men in the presbyterate. It has discussions of how each diocese and religious order should go about preparing for the financial strain of caring for so many priests with AIDS. It makes recommendations about whether to screen seminarians for HIV, a policy eventually adopted across the country. Experts in the field talk about the arrested psychosexual development of homosexual men in the seminary and the priesthood. The research and investigations being conducted back in 2000, both from the clerical organization and secular media outlets, began unearthing disturbing parallels. Priests and even bishops were dying from AIDS at an alarming rate. In 1995, New York Auxiliary Bishop Emerson Moore died of AIDS in a Minnesota hospice, God rest his soul. Across the country, estimates from assorted experts put the number of Catholic priests dying from the disease at as high as 1,000 in roughly a 10 to 15 year span. Numbers were showing that priests were becoming infected and dying at a rate as high as 10 times the national average. All this strongly suggested that the number of homosexual men in the Catholic priesthood was much higher than even the most suspicious had guessed. It wasn't long before the truth started coming out, tied as it was to the AIDS death news. Numerous independent sources inside the church began polling and interviewing and questioning and researching. Their results were jaw-dropping. One survey done by a New Jersey Franciscan priest and researcher revealed that 45% of 500 priests surveyed volunteered that they were gay and that 1 in 4 of them had AIDS, proving a rampant promiscuity. Over the years, a large number of surveys, polls, and research have produced a wide range of estimates of the percentage of men in the ranks of the ordained who are homosexual, as low as 15%, all the way up to 58%. Now that compares to an overall national percentage of about 1.5%. Even if the lowball estimate of 15% of priests are gay is right, it would still be 10 times the national average. And if the high end is closer to reality, then over half of all men in the priesthood and episcopate are homosexual and would represent a population almost 50 times the national average. Where are we going with all this? Underscoring some of our reports from last week that the church in America and other countries of the West is controlled by a homosexual collective, the most in-your-face example of which is the recent outlandish scandal and alleged cover-up in the Archdiocese of New York. The destruction rained down on innocent souls in the care of Cardinal Timothy Dolan and his New York Archdiocese Chancery is shameful, scandalous, and sinful. and it has happened as the result of one accused homosexual priest and the extensive cover-up and excusing of his actions by influential and high-ranking officials in the Chancery and even Rome. This week's Mic'd Up episode begins to unravel that cover-up and peer more closely at the civil case, the ecclesiastical case, as well as a potential criminal case, which could bring this whole sordid mess crashing to a conclusion.
Cardinal Dolan acknowledged the fact that she had sent him this horrible, salacious email with just disgusting, this we will not publish, disgusting details of the sexual life of the priest and the gay for pay prostitute, Keith.
And embezzlement, money being taken.
And embezzlement. Lots of embezzlement. So they asked him, and he said, well, we were going to have this meeting, and we're going to get into all of this and everything, but then she just didn't show up. Now, that was him. He acknowledges the email and the content in it, so much so that he says he turned it over to the DA's office. And he acknowledged that a meeting was set up. She had contacted them. And then he says, oh, well, you know, she just didn't show up. And I want to make sure that the New York Archdiocese hears this coming from this studio right now. We know, and we know that you know, that there are homosexual priests living with their gay lovers in various rectories in the Archdiocese of New York. We know that. You know that. You know that we know that. And when we're done with this case, or as we continue this case, we're coming after every one of those too. You clear out that homosexual collective running the church in New York and in many other places around the country, or we and faithful Catholics all around the country will clear it out for you.
So here is the situation in a nutshell. The American Catholic Church is largely controlled by homosexual clergy and their allies. Those not in the network are powerless to confront it, owing to its vast influence and fear factor, as well as not really understanding how it operates. The Catholic establishment media won't get within a million miles of this issue of the homosexual collective because they are too scared, and their bosses will not let them do it, their bosses being the bishops. But you lay faithful and independent Catholic media outlets like Church Militant, as well as others, don't suffer for being wedded to the establishment. It's why we can pour resources into a story like the New York scandal and use it as a springboard to help you understand the even larger stakes involved. The power of this homosexual collective must be broken, and the first step in that is exposing it. We invite you to view this week's Mic'd Up and watch the anatomy of a cover-up. Over the past half-century, tens of thousands of homosexual men have been recruited and admitted into the priesthood. Many of them went on to be serial abusers, but others, large numbers of them, have used the church as a means to deal with their own psychosexual drama and laid waste to the faith of tens of millions in the process. This evil must be dragged into the light and those responsible dealt with. God love you. I'm Michael Voris.